A Hong Kong action movie with maybe a slight piece of truth. Let's talk about Twilight of the Warriors Walled In. Hey everyone, it's David Stark from Watcher Pass. Today I'm here to talk to you about Twilight of the Warriors Walled In, which comes at theaters on August 9th, 2024. It is a new Hong Kong drama that is kind of loosely-ish based on maybe a story. It's based on a real place, the place called the Kowloon Walled City, which existed in Hong Kong. This is I believe, I'm pretty sure, dramatization of kind of the things that might have happened there, but it also is a really, really good movie. My hot take is I think you should watch it. It is a well-done martial arts Hong Kong drama with plenty of characters, lots of intrigue, and some really stellar martial arts action. I loved the fight in this. I love kind of like the different factions and things like that and how they interacted. It has a kind of an ensemble cast, and it is just a really kind of fun movie, despite the less than stellar name. So I definitely think you should check it out. Check it out when it comes to theaters on August 9th, 2024. And I'm going to tell you a little about the film, a few things I liked, a few things I didn't like, and then really quickly go into the ending. So as you can imagine, there will be spoilers in the ending section. If you don't know what happens in this movie, and you might not, there are some big surprises, some big reveals along the way. I would turn it off when they get to the ending. Before that, though, I'll keep it vague. I'll keep it spoiler-free. Unless you want to get to those spoilers. So Twilight of the Warriors Walled In, again, deals with this this real place in Hong Kong called the Kowloon Walled City. In the movie, they say it was like a gold mine, but I think it was actually like a fort that was abandoned, and then a city just kind of like sprung up around it. And when it was in use, it had like an insanely dense number of people. It was like 53,000 people for, I think it was like 6.4 acres of space. So it was just this dense, highly built, like semi-regulated place that was kind of like, almost a no man's land. But because of that, it turned into a place for underground people, but also turned into like a place that had a sense of community because people were so packed in on each other. Now, this film is a dramatization where you have a person who unexpectedly comes into the walled city and starts to interact with some of the major players in there. Does he survive? Does he get on their good side? And what does he find when he enters this place? Well, you have to watch the movie to find out. So, things I liked about this movie. The first, I love the action. It's really, really well done. Really good martial arts action. A ton of like very over the top fights, a lot of over the top kind of like sequences. And one thing I really loved is like there is just so much destruction that happens. Like every fight, someone will get like punched through a wall or a table will break. It's almost like every major move, something shatters, and it's really fun. It gives you a sense, like a visceral feel to it. It gives it like a sense of excitement. It gives you a sense of just being like bigger and more action-packed than you would normally expect. And I loved it. It had so many very different sequences. And also like they're not all hand to hand. There's some weapons involved. There's a gun battle at one point. There's a lot of different types of fighting, and they are all very, very fun. The second thing I loved the epic music. During the fights, especially, there was some really, really good music. Almost at times, it feels like a boss battle. You get this really kind of like powerful music while these characters are doing kind of like death-defying, over-the-top, superhuman type of feats. The third thing I love the characters. Like I said, there's a lot of different factions in here that you get to interact with, and a lot of different, very kind of strange characters. Each of them are very quirky. Some of them have almost superpower, and it's fun to kind of meet them, see what they're like, and see where they all fit in the hierarchy of the walled city and some of the people beyond. And the last thing I love the intrigue. There are some factions that are kind of vying for the walled city. There's some factions within the walled city, and so you get a little bit of intrigue as people are kind of like moving for different places or trying to like get their goals done, and some of that can be really fun, especially when you've got some quirky characters and some over-the-top fights. And the last thing I like the story. Like it is definitely not based on anything real, I assume. I don't know that for a fact, but I assume it's not based on anything real. But it has a really nice start where you get to introduce to these people and this like mysterious character, and then you get to see that progress through to a very kind of like fun, over the top, super action ending, which was great. And you get to see like the progression of the characters. You get to meet some characters that you didn't really kind of like think you would interact with. I really just like the whole overall process. It is a long movie. It is 127 minutes, but I didn't mind it at all. I thought it was really fun throughout. So I definitely really enjoyed it. Now, only thing I didn't really love, and it's kind of a minor point. This is normally a pet peeve of mine, but I was fine in this. There is some CG in this movie, some CG for like the city, but it doesn't look terrible, and it's not super distracting. Like the action, I think, is all kind of like well done, some practical effects, things like that. There's definitely some cables, some sort of like martial arts action happening. But none of that seems to be CG. The CG seems to be kind of in the background. So it looks almost like, I don't know, like Alita Battle Angel level. It is good looking. It's not super distracting because it's not like front and center right in your face. And you can just kind of forgive it. It just kind of like becomes part of the overall aesthetic of the film, but there is some CG that is noticeable, but overall it's fine. Like I said, I really like this movie. I think you should definitely check it out. So that is Twilight of the Warriors Walled In, coming to theaters on August 9th, 2024. And I'm gonna really quickly go into an ending discussion right now. So if you don't know what happens in this movie, I would turn it off now because there will be spoilers. So Twilight of the Warriors Walled In starts with like an introduction to the walled city and this, I guess, epic battle that took place between some of the factions vying for control. There was one faction was led by this person named Liew, who kind of kept control because he had this super powerful killer named Jim. Again, great name, right? The super powerful killer named Jim. Jim Chan, the king of killers. Now, he was this like ruthless soldier, but eventually and Liew, by extension, was defeated by this person named Cyclone, who came into the city and united those who were opposed to Liew, and then they fought, and eventually Cyclone beat Jim. And so that brought an end to this warring era. And so ever since then, Cyclone has controlled the city. Now, we are in 1980s Hong Kong. We were outside of the walled city, and there is like a fight that happens between these two random people. One of them is this bald person named Locke, and he's a good fighter. It's a ruthless fight. They're like in a bar. There's glass on the ground. They use the glass to fight. It is a visceral, like really well done Fight Club kind of fight. Locke eventually wins, and so he goes before this person named Mr. Big, this like Hong Kong boss, this boss of the Triads, and basically like wants his money. And that person's like, "No, you should come work for me. Like I liked your fighting." And he's like, "No, I just want the money." And like, "What are you gonna use the money for?" And Locke is like, "I'm gonna get an ID card because he is a refugee. He came here. He has no identification, so he wants an ID card. I guess probably to work and also to maybe like not get harassed by people." So the boss is like, "Hey, I do ID cards. I'll just get you one." So he takes Locke's winnings and is going to give him an ID card. Locke comes back in 2 weeks, gets his ID card, and it is garbage. It's like a piece of paper. It looks like it's like hand drawn. It's like half laminated. And Locke's like, "What is this? Like, this isn't going to work." And that's basically the boss's FU for not, working for him. He's like, "You should have worked for me. Now you're not going to get anything, blah, blah, blah." And one of his henchmen, this guy who's got like this really wonderful, like lion's mane type of haircut and sunglasses, and then tells him to like buzz off. So Locke is outnumbered. He's getting pushed around, so he decides to leave. But before he does, on his way out, he grabs a bag of something from the Triad's like base, something that they're sorting. So he runs. He gets pursued by them. There's this like really great pursuit scene where he's running. He gets in a bus. All of a sudden, they jump on the bus. They're fighting through the bus windows. Glass is breaking. The bus benches are getting destroyed. Eventually, Locke is able to escape and he runs into the walled city. And when he gets to the walled city, the other Triad members like stop and basically don't approach the walled city. So when he gets into the walled city, when he finally has a moment to look, he looks in the bag, and unfortunately, he didn't grab a bag of cash. He grabbed a bag of heroin. So that's not super useful to Locke. He goes and tries to sell it to like someone who seems to be pushing drugs, but they get mad at him, and so he has to fight a big group of people. He fights for his life. Eventually, they kind of pursue him. He runs into a barber shop and takes this like old barber hostage. And he's like, "Don't come any closer, I'll hurt him." All the people that are pursuing him just kind of like look at him and kind of smile. And that's when you find out that this barber might be a little bit more than he's cracked up to be. He disarms Locke very easily and then just like proceeds to beat him handily, like essentially punching him. Locke flies across the room, goes into walls. The barber eventually like dislocates his shoulder and then, basically tells him to go. And so Locke grabs his bag of drugs and leaves. So Locke is trying to survive. He gets some charity from some people, but eventually he goes back to the boss. And that person we find out later is Cyclone. This is the Cyclone who controls the walled city. I guess he's also a barber, and so he has a barber shop, but he's also a great martial artist. Now Cyclone seems to kind of take pity on him. Locke looks like he's not in great shape, so he tells Locke to give him the bag of drugs, which he does, and then Cyclone takes him to this person named AV who is to patch him up. And AV has like a weird mask that he always wears. I guess he's got scars all over, so I guess he's got scars on his face. He doesn't want to show, but he patches up Locke. Now, Cyclone seems to know the various other bosses because he goes to Mr. Big with the bag of drugs and some cash and just like shows up in Mr. Big's house, gives it to him, says like, "Here's your drugs. The matter's settled," essentially. So now that Cyclone has paid off Locke's debt, Locke has to now work for Cyclone. But Cyclone seems like a good boss. Like Locke starts working around the city doing odd jobs to pay off his debt, and Cyclone seems to care about the city. You see him like in various scenes where Locke is working, talking to people, helping people out, things like that. Now, eventually, Cyclone, comes to Locke and asks, like, essentially, why you're penny pinching, you're working 3 jobs, why are you saving up so much money? And he's like, I need an ID. And so the Locke is working hard, he's not causing trouble, he's sleeping like, in this like burned out building. And so Cyclone brings him in, gets him some food, and finds him a place to live. And after that, Cyclone like essentially takes Locke under his wing. Now, after he starts working for Cyclone, he befriends this little girl who works in one of the shops he's working with. And her mother, I think, is either a prostitute or at least is in a very bad relationship. This person that she is seeing is like being very mean, like is beating her. And so Locke doesn't do anything there. But later, we find that little girl looking up and we see her mother dead. And her mother's dead, like hanging from some of the cables up in the city. Now, Locke goes up, gets her down. The girl goes to be comforted and whatnot. But they all kind of know who did it, but there's no proof. And so that person seems to go free until Locke decides, you know what? I'm going to do some justice. So Locke goes to a store and gets like this really terrible disguise, like two little like candy wrapper things covering his eyes and like a rag. So he hunts this person down and is about to beat him up when all of a sudden 3 other people in masks come and they all have the same idea. They all want to beat this guy up. So they all take turns, like they all beat him senseless. At some point, Locke's mask falls off and one of the people's like, oh, no, no, and like gives him another mask, like a Santa Claus mask. So they're all wearing these horrible like masks, beating this person up. At one point, like it's violent, but it's also humorous. At one point, they grab all of his, like each of his limbs, like one person on each limb, arm, leg, and they're just lifting him up and like lifting him up and slamming him down like you would like a sheet if you're playing a game. And so they beat him down. So they don't kill him, but he is very, very hurt. Now, after this, they all go off and they take off their masks and you find out who they were. So one of them was AV, that person that patched up Locke. One of them is Shin, who seems to be like Cyclone's second in command. One of them was this person named 12th Master, who is this like kung fu master who works for this other boss out, outside the city named Tiger. But I guess he feels an affinity for the Walled City, so he's in there occasionally. So they all kind of meet up. They all reveal themselves after and then go and get some food and play, I think, mahjong. They play some sort of tiles game. Locke loses horribly, but I think he's happy. Like they're all having fun. They're all like he's finding like a family that he doesn't have. So now it seems like his fortunes are turning around. So next we see Cyclone going to meet with this person named Chow, this like old, this person who lives outside Hong Kong, but he apparently, I don't know, I guess he owns the Walled City land or something. Cyclone is paying rent to Chow, and they seem to have a good friendship. They seem to be on a good, they seem to have like a good friendship. It seems like they're friends. And so we also find out that Chow was taken hostage during the first war, the first like war 30 years ago. He was taken hostage by Liew, and Jim, the ruthless killer, killed Chow's wife and son. Now, he didn't kill Chow because Cyclone ended up beating Jim. But ever since then, Chow has had a grudge against Jim and his family. So Jim is dead, but Chow wants an eye for an eye. He wants to kill Jim's wife and child. Now, I think the wife already died, but the child was still out there, and we don't know who the child is, but we find out the Chow is still kind of obsessed with that death. Now, later, Locke goes up to Cyclone and says he wants to stay in the Walled City, and Cyclone gives him like a shave. And I guess that's what he does. And while Cyclone is shaving Locke, he notices something. And then we find out a little bit more information. We find out that, yes, that fight happened 30 years ago. Yes, the major fight was between Jim and Cyclone, but they were apparently good friends. They actually like were friends in the Walled City. Jim would come to Cyclone for a shave, which was probably very dangerous for a killer to do because you got like a razor to your neck, but he trusted Cyclone. They were good friends. And so even when the war happened, even when the battle happened, they fought each other kind of in private. And while they're fighting, they fight themselves to a standstill. They can't actually kill each other because they're friends. And so they decide to cover up their eyes so it's easier for them to fight and so they could actually strike each other. And while they're blindfolding each other for this final fight, Jim tells Cyclone, if I die, take care of my wife and child. And Cyclone tells Jim, if I die, learn to cut hair and open a barbershop. So you don't see the final fight, but you know what happens because the next scene we see Cyclone taking Jim's wife and child, to essentially a pier, giving her some money and telling her that a ship has been booked and she can like get safe passage. She's understandably upset. Cyclone killed her husband, so she slaps him, but she goes. So later, Chow gets some information. Chow finds out who the person is that is Jim's son. He says he's got a name, and the person's name is Chan Lock Swan. Now, he doesn't know that that lock is the same lock that Cyclone has under his wing. Cyclone, once he realized, I think, who Lock was, started kind of protecting him, making sure that he didn't interact with Chow. But someone else knows who Locke is, someone who maybe got him a fake ID card. This person named Mr. Big goes up to Chow and basically says, like, I'll give you Locke if you essentially give me the Walled City. He wants the Walled City because I guess it's worth a ton, and so he wants to like use it, resell it, or maybe charge a ton of rent. I'm not sure what he wants it for. Just make some money, I guess. Chow, because he's so upset that his friend has been hiding Locke, says okay. One morning, Locke is woken up very, hurriedly by his friends. His friends Shin, 12th Master, and AV. They're packing him up, telling him he's got to go. He's got to go. That they've got a boat ready for him, and they're trying to like get him out of the Walled City. Now he's about to leave. He's talking to Cyclone. Cyclone tells him to go. They've got no choice. But as this is happening, Chow shows up, and Chow is very upset. He sees Cyclone, he sees Locke, he thinks that they're working together. I mean, they kind of are working together, but not like in the way that Chow thinks. And so Chow gets into a fight with Locke. Now they go back and forth. Cyclone doesn't step in to help either of them. They go back and forth. Eventually, Locke gets the better of Chow, and he is about to kill Chow. He's like heading forward with a knife, and that's when Cyclone intervenes and stops it. Now, after he stops the fight, he tells Locke not to come back to Hong Kong, and that's when Chow tries to attack Cyclone, and Cyclone stops him, but Locke tries to step in, and in the process, Chow stabs Locke. Now, after this, Chow leaves, and he goes up to Mr. Big and says he wants Locke dead. And before, he was just going to get a favor from Chow, but now he says if Mr. Big kills Locke, then Mr. Big can take Cyclone's place in the Walled City. So he would then control this valuable piece of land, and Mr. Big is excited about this. So while this is happening, Locke's friends are going to try to get him out. Now, remember, he was stabbed, but he's still alive, but he's not in great shape. So eventually, his friends are trying to get him out, but Mr. Big is going in, trying to infiltrate and take out Locke before his friends can do it. So now you have this really intense fight sequence where Mr. Big and some of his men go and try to take out Locke's friends, the people who are trying to defend Locke. And you have these really elaborate fights where they're like trying to wheel Locke out of the city, but they're fighting people off, like they're carrying Locke as like people are attacking them. There's all sorts of really great fight sequences. It's a big brawl. And we find out that Mr. Big's like second in command. This person, eventually they call him King. I don't actually know what his name is before this, so I'm just going to call him King. He has kind of almost superpowers. He has, this like spirit power that gives him essentially armor. So whenever they punch him or try to stab him, it doesn't actually hit him. But he is also very strong. He uses his fingers and he can just like poke through wood, stone, flesh. So he is essentially like a super fighter. Now, Cyclone and his men are really, really good fighters, but they don't have like superpower, so they can only do so much. Now, eventually, this fight comes down to Mr. Big and Cyclone. Cyclone is defending Locke. Mr. Big is there. They have a fight, and you wouldn't think Mr. Big is a good fighter, but he actually turns out to be a pretty good fighter. Him and Cyclone have a fairly epic battle. Now, Cyclone eventually fights him to a standstill, but this causes a ton of effort in him. He is already sick. He's been coughing up blood for a lot of the movie, and so while he's fighting, he tries to stop Mr. Big from going after Locke, and during that fight, he eventually like spits up some blood. And Mr. Big's second, King, uses this time to then stab Cyclone. So after Cyclone is stabbed, this bald fighter takes Mr. Big and King and throws them into a room and like closes the door and like bars it with his body. And so they're trying to get out. Locke and his friends are using this time to like get him out of the city. Mr. Big and King are like trying to get out. King like is stabbing this person, but he's holding as long as he can. Now, eventually, they're able to wheel Locke out of the city. They just get him out of the city. And when that happens, he gets taken by authorities, but thankfully he's safe. Now, after this, Chow is mad because Mr. Big and King took over, but they didn't kill Locke. Now, unfortunately for Chow, he made deals with some madmen. And so they take Chow captive and like are trying to force him to sell the Walled City. He was just going to give them like essentially a rent contract, but they want to own the Walled City. And so they capture him in a cage. They're holding him until he does it. Now, unfortunately for Mr. Big, King is a very ambitious person and he's a good fighter. So eventually he decides to kill Mr. Big and take over. So he strangles Mr. Big, and now King becomes the head of the Walled City. 3 months later, it is going downhill. King is like ruling and being like a loud, obnoxious person. No one is very happy. Before, everyone was happy. There was a sense of community. There was a sense of like shared purpose. Now it feels like King is just kind of like being a dictator and no one likes him. So on the other side, we've got Locke. Locke is in prison and he's recovering, and he goes to the prison board and tells them who he is, tells them he's from Hong Kong. They end up finding his birth record since now he knows who he is and he knows where he's from. And they give him an ID. And because he has an ID, he is now out of, I guess he was arrested for not having an ID for being a refugee, but because now he has an ID, he's from Hong Kong, they let him go. Locke goes to find his friends. Eventually, finds them all hanging out on like a floating house. They left the walled city. They've been trying to recover. You've got AV there. You've got Shin, who has, I think, a few less fingers. And you've got the 12th Master, who hurt his leg, but he still, is okay. He's still recovering. Now, they eventually get together and they plan to avenge Cyclone and take back the walled city. Now, eventually, during their assault, Locke takes on King and they have an epic fight, but unfortunately, all of King's men are there. And so they start shooting at Locke. I think they start shooting at Locke, but that's when Locke's friends show up. They all come out there, they all start fighting. It is an epic battle between King's men. And eventually, Locke is pursuing King while the other men are taking out the various soldiers. And Locke is pursuing King like through the rooftops, trying to dodge King's double machine guns, trying to fight King, who also has like super armor and whatnot. It is an unfair fight, but Locke is holding his own. And eventually, they all arrive at the rooftop of a building to fight King, and they do a valiant job. But again, King has like superpowers. He can't be stabbed. He can't be hurt. He has like superpower fingers that he can break stuff with. And so while they're fighting, they do as much as they can, and eventually they tie up all of his limbs with cables. And they do kind of a callback to how they first met, where they first beat up that monstrous man. They all have his limbs on cables, and they all throw him up and down like a sheet, just slamming him into the ground. But King is still very powerful, so he eventually gets out of that. Now, he is going to hurt some of Locke's friends, and Locke decides that he's going to kind of end this. So he runs at King, grabs him, puts him in a chokehold, and jumps off the building. And he doesn't fall all the way because there are cables attached to King, attached to, I think, King and Locke. I think they're like all tangled up in cables. And I think it was AV. One of the guys, one of the fighters, grabs the cables and is holding him up. Now, Locke is holding on to King, and eventually King grabs a sword and stabs Locke, like, kind of from behind. And Locke takes that sword and tries to, stab King in the mouth. And so he puts the sword in King's mouth, but King, being super powerful, breaks the sword tip off, with his teeth. But this kind of turns into Locke's favor because Locke puts his hand over King's mouth and starts punching him in the stomach. And eventually, King swallows that blade. But King fights off Locke, goes back onto the building, and is going to throw, I think, Shin off the building. Locke heads up, saves Shin, but then they start all fighting. But now it seems like something is going on with King. That blade that he swallowed is like inside him and starts like poking out. And I guess when this thing is poking out, maybe his armor is breached because he has something hurting him from the inside. And that makes him much more vulnerable. They're all able to fight him. It is a much more fair fight. I mean, as fair as a 4-on-1 fight could be. They're able to hurt him. They're able to beat him up. And eventually, Locke gives a sword to Shin. And Shin ends up finishing King as a nice kind of like remembrance to when King killed his master. So there we go. King is dead. Our friends have survived. They go back, they free Chow, and when Chow looks up, he sees first Jim, the person he hates, and then he sees Cyclone, his old friend that he betrayed, and then he sees Locke. And so maybe this is like an indication that that debt is forgiven, that all will be fine. But we don't really find out much more because after that, Locke just leaves. And the movie ends with our four friends up on like the edge of the walled city, looking out over it, and they're talking about how the walled city will come down at some point. At this point, I think uh, Hong Kong officials had said they're going to, tear down the walled city. They just don't know when. And so these friends are kind of counting down the time until the walled city goes away. But even though it's going to go away, they do say that even if the walled city goes away, they believe some things will never change. And I think that's probably their friendship, I guess. It seems like Locke has found a new family. It seems like Locke has found some companions. And so they'll all be okay. He'll be okay. I don't know if he's going to go work for another boss or what he's going to do, but it seems like at least for the time being, he's found a home and he's found some new friends. So that is the end of Twilight of the Warriors Walled In. And during the credits, there are some other scenes from the Walled City, just like our friends back in the Walled City doing like their various jobs and kind of like continuing to like live in the walled city. It's nice. It's a nice little like uh it's a nice little like extra footage that you get to see. But overall, I really like this movie. I thought it had some really great action, had a fun story, and some really good characters. So I definitely think you should check it out on August 9th, 2024 when it comes to theaters. And if you do watch it, let me know what you think. Let me know what you liked and didn't like. I would love to hear it. And thanks so much for watching. If you like this review, please like and subscribe to this channel. It helps me out a lot. Make sure all my new content goes straight to you. Thank you.